Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to this afternoon's live webinar event, which is entitled Enabling Diversity and Access to Higher Education and at Work. This is the next in our series of alumni and friends webinars, which have concentrated so far on things like careers, entrepreneurship, sustainability, the response to COVID-19, and now we're moving on to diversity in both higher education and the workplace. I am the registrar at the University of Warwick. Most of my friends still think that means that I just take the register of students coming in and out of their classrooms. I wish it was, but it's not that. It's just HE speak for saying basically I effectively head up the professional services, the non-academic side of the university. So it's very broadest brush. I'm proud to say that as a kind of an alumni community, we now have over 253,000 alumni who are a very rich and generous source of expertise and ideas, who are willing, for which we're very grateful, to share those with other alumni. And two of those are with us today, who I'm now going to introduce. One is Elam Fardad, who is the founder and CEO of the charity Migrant Leaders, and also the co-founder and CEO of ID Inclusion. And she gained her MBA with us in 2003. The second is Justin Okunisi, who is the head of retail multi-asset funds at Legal and General Investment Management. And he graduated from Warwick in 2003 as well, obviously a good year, with a BSc in economics. I'm also delighted to introduce you to Warwick's very own Director of Social Inclusion, Kulbir Shergill. So our first speaker is going to be Elam. She spent before she's doing what she's doing now, she spent 25 years in senior leadership roles in blue chip multinationals, which included GE, News Corp and Ernst & Young. She launched Migrant Leaders almost 3 years ago with the aim of supporting young first and second generation immigrants to succeed in Britain. It supports the student opportunity team here at Warwick by offering mentoring support to Warwick students and alumni, for which we are very grateful. Justin is an advisor to the board of City Hive Limited, which focuses on driving diversity initiatives throughout the asset management industry. He was recently awarded the Freedom of the City of London for his work within diversity and inclusion, for which many congratulations. I think that now means you can herd the sheep over the bridge, doesn't it? To be very handy. Kulbir also has worked with a wide variety of people over 20 years, from commercial firms and both local and central government, as well as not-for-profit organisations, but is currently leading the development and implementation of our 10-year social inclusion strategy. So thank you all for sparing your valuable time and joining us today. And I hope you will all be as thrilled as I am by the wealth and richness of the expertise that they bring to this webinar. So the format is we're going to have roughly 5 minutes from each of the speakers, starting with Elam, going on to Justin, and then Kulbir, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. We've had some pre-submitted questions, which we will use some of those, but please feel free to put any Q&A that occur to you as you listen to the speakers in the Q&A chat function, which is at the kind of the bottom of the screens. So you're probably fed up hearing from me now, so I am going to, without further ado, hand over to Elam for her 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for the introduction, and thank you, Andrea, for the invitation today. Hello, everyone. My name is Elam Fardad, and I am the CEO and founder of the charity Migrant Leaders. Today, I can disclose to you that I am someone in her 40s, married with 2 wonderful children, and I've had a very rewarding 23-year career as a finance director and transformation director in companies such as GE, News Corp, and Ernst & Young. but life wasn't always this good. When I was 18 years old, I was just a young migrant growing up in Birmingham. And even though my family were relatively educated, we still experienced many of the challenges and adversities that migrant families typically experience. So by 18, I had no money, visa problems, broken family, and no hope. But I knew one thing, that education was going to be the way I would get myself out of that situation. But I had a problem. As a migrant, I didn't have funding to go to university. I had saved up £4,000 by the time I was 18, teaching maths and working in shops and selling stuff. But I handed that over to my mum, who I thought needs it more than I do, with my younger brother. And I was once again penniless at 18. So I decided that, yes, to be able to go to university, I need to be counted as a home student. So I camped outside Birmingham City Council offices for 3 days in a row until I got to talk to someone in a position of authority and convinced him, and he was kind enough to help me so I could be counted as a home student, and off I went to university. And it was actually as a direct result of that kindness and opportunity that people in Birmingham gave me, that it meant that I graduated from university, qualified as a chartered accountant, and a few years later, at the age of 25, got my first big break as a financial controller in GE. And the following 20 years is history, working as an FD in News Corp and Ernst & Young. I remember back in GE when I had been there for about 4 or 5 months, and I could sense that they're happy with my work and I had settled in well and I had delivered some good results. I went to my general manager and said that, look, I have something very tax efficient to tell you about. I really want to do the Warwick MBA. And I want to do an executive MBA. And I've been speaking to them, and they said they're going to give me the opportunity, even though I would be the youngest ever in the executive MBA, they are going to give me the opportunity, and they've made me an offer. So I really would appreciate it if GE pay for this, and it's really tax efficient. Before I could put the whole case forward, my general manager said, would that make you happy? And I said, I am already happy, but I would really appreciate it. And I'm very grateful to GE because they paid for my Warwick MBA, and I got to experience the incredible journey that was Warwick Executive MBA program. And I was privileged enough to be surrounded by fantastic people at Warwick University, the faculty, as well as the experienced MBAs who I learned a lot from the next few years. So 20 years passed, and back in 2017, I thought I was doing all right. I was a senior manager in Ernst & Young, doing well, mentoring a few ethnic minorities at EY. But the Parker Review was published in 2017, and I realized, actually, looking at the ethnic diversity of corporates in Britain, we have a problem, not only in terms of ethnicity, but also in terms of social mobility. So I launched the charity Migrant Leaders, registered with the Charity Commission at the end of 2017. And where we are today is that we have almost 700 senior mentors from 95 FTSE 100 and leading firms. We match them very carefully to the sector and technical aspirations of our young mentees, who are between 16 and 25 years old, predominantly first and second generation young migrants. But we've also opened up the program to other disadvantaged young people across the UK. We also have deep corporate partnerships with Anglo-American, Smith & Nephew, and Kantar. And the last 3 years, we've been delivering workshops, conferences, work experiences, virtual internships, and really incredible things have emerged from these connections and mentoring relationships. I will end by sharing with you 2 or 3 little stories of some of our typical mentees. A couple of them are from India, first generation migrants who came to the UK 10 years ago. I remember application of one of them back in 2018 when he applied to Migrant Leaders Development Program. He said that he really wants to become one of the best engineers in this country. And he's now at Manchester University studying engineering. And just this summer, when he was looking for an internship in an engineering company, one of our Migrant Leaders mentors, who is a senior member or a board member at ABB, kindly offered these two engineers to join the internship at ABB this summer. So the connections at Migrant Leaders create incredible opportunities for young people. Others, such as Wazifa, ended up being the first from her school to be accepted to study medicine at a university, because her Migrant Leaders mentor kindly took her to her university, which was UCL, and practiced interviews with her, gave her a tour and put her at ease. So the Migrant Leaders mentors are really the source of value in our charity, Migrant Leaders. I would encourage everyone to check our website, migrantleaders.org.uk, connect with me, Elham Fardod, on LinkedIn, so that we can continue the conversations. And if anyone is interested in the charity in any capacity, such as mentoring, please feel free to let me know. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic story and a completely shameless plug, for which I applaud you. Quite right too. Justin, over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to start with a story about Joy. Joy was, or is still, hardworking. She was a straight-A student. She went to a Russell Group university, a black woman who grew up in Birmingham, actually. She did economics, and she was desperate to get into the investment and savings industry, asset management. She applied like crazy at university. She got this job as an asset manager in the operations team. But she strived to always want to be an investor. She invested her own money at weekends. She wanted to be a fund manager. She wanted to be an investor. I was mentoring Joy probably about 4 years ago. And we got into a discussion about her progression and how she can get onto the investment floor. And she said something that was just really struck a chord to me. And it was that even if a role became available on the investment floor, she wouldn't actually take it. And when I asked her why, she was like, well, I look at the investment floor and I see nobody that looks or sounds like me. In my current team, which actually is quite diverse, I've got enough trouble trying to fit in. So why on earth would I go and do that to myself? So Joy's story struck a chord to me in a number of ways. You know, I grew up in inner city Manchester, not in the most well-off area. My house, a single parent family, my house got repossessed in the early 90s recession. I got kicked out of my house in my GCSE year, lived in temporary accommodation. But somehow I managed to kind of get decent grades at school. And I got into Warwick University to do economics. And I thought that would be the great leveler. But it actually wasn't. You know, when it came to applying for jobs in my third year, I had to apply to, seems to be a disproportionate number than other people, over 70. Only got a response from a handful of companies. But eventually I got a job. I got a job in financial services. And I thought that would be the great leveler. But again, it wasn't. It wasn't. In the workplace, I had further challenges. My accent, my demeanor, my mannerisms, my clothing, my skin color. I didn't feel that I belonged. Eventually, I moved into fund management and became a fund manager, managing money, being an investor. And I moved to Aviva Investors. I was managing £40 billion at Aviva Investors. So I thought that would be the great leveler. But again, it wasn't. It wasn't. Even as a PM, even as in this prestigious role, I was still, you know, being mistaken for a security guard, still being mistaken for a cleaner in my own office, still when I go to presentations being asked to being asked to put on other fund managers' presentations because people mistook me for a tech person. So these challenges have made me always feel that a bit of an imposter really in that fund management role. But on self-reflection and having that discussion with Joy, I realized that we can help people navigate the workplace. So I set up these monthly mentoring circles where every month we have 15 people on one side of the table and 2 senior mentors, role models on the other side of the table. And we simply help them navigate the workplace, usually by themes. So it might be imposter syndrome, authenticity, microaggressions, and we help people navigate the workplace so they don't have to go through the challenges that I believe I once went through. And now I'm at Elgin. I manage less than I managed at Aviva actually, but £10 billion. And it's probably the place where I felt like I belong the most. But there are still lots and lots of challenges. And inclusion is extremely difficult. You can't just say, I am inclusive. You actually have to do something and work hard at it. I'm going to tell you another story. And this is another story which struck a chord to me, which really meant that, or increased the drive for me to do something. It's a story about a lady called Grace, a girl called Grace, a 3-year-old girl called Grace. And every Christmas in the city of London, companies tend to invite people's families into the office so people's kids can come in, etc., etc. And Grace went into the office with her dad. And you know, she was enjoying herself, lots of sweets, lots of chocolates, and playing with all the other boys and girls whose parents worked in the office. And there was a Russian lady in the team plaiting people's hair. And Grace really wanted to get her hair plaited. And she waited in the queue patiently. And then when it was her turn, the lady said, Grace, I can't plait your hair. Grace was a black girl. So on the way home, Grace asked her dad, was the reason why that lady couldn't plait my hair because I've got brown skin, Daddy? If you haven't guessed it, Grace is actually my daughter. And that to me was an extremely painful experience of me having to explain to her why that lady couldn't plait her hair. So this is why inclusion is complex. Inclusion is difficult. Even if you're not intending to exclude people, you can exclude people. So the only thing I want to leave you with is a quick soundbite, and it's a soundbite that many of you may have heard. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being invited to dance, but belonging is being able to dance in your own way. We all want to belong at the businesses that we work at, and therefore to strive for belonging and to help people get that belonging is really important. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. I've heard the diversity and inclusion in relation to the dancing analogy, but I've never heard that belonging one. So I've just written it down. That's great. Thank you. Cool Beer, follow that.
I will do my best. Two fantastic presentations, but thank you for inviting me today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our kind of approach, particularly around inclusion, but specifically around mentoring actually and role modeling. So our social inclusion strategy, its very purpose is to increase access to higher education by removing economic, social and cultural barriers that prevent people from studying and working with success at Warwick. And we've got three very, very kind of clear objectives. The first is about increasing diversity of staff and students, because for a research and learning institution, diversity of thought is critical to our innovation and creativity. But not just that, equality and inclusion is also central to our values. But as Justin has very eloquently pointed out, diversity is not enough. Our second objective is actually to develop an inclusive culture, because that's when we really see the fruits of diversity. We want people to thrive and achieve their potential and be inspired to be their very best selves. And thirdly, we want to kind of excel at our civic responsibilities, regionally, nationally, and internationally. Because we are an international university. We want to share our research and experience in our understanding of inclusion and diversity to influence both policy and practice. And I can talk about our strategy all day, but I'm just going to pick up on how we're using mentoring in particular, which I think is really important for talent development and role modeling. But just a little bit about the diversity piece. I mean, we've set targets to help us to create greater diversity at senior levels, because it's really important and we're lacking diversity there. We have made great strides in improving gender diversity at senior levels, and it's fantastic to see people like Rachel there. I know how important a role model she is. But race is still a challenge for us. But there are a number of interventions that are helping us to start to turn this around. And one of the things that we did about 2 years ago was actually revising our academic promotions. And this has actually been a huge help. And some of the revisions that we made were actually some very, very kind of practical challenges in understanding where bias creeps into those processes. So let me just run you through a couple of them, because sometimes they're so simple. So one was actually removing the need for head of department approval. And we know so often that women and others in minority groups are told, you're not ready yet, so you can't apply and I'm not going to support you. So we took that bit out. They don't need to ask for that permission anymore. We also looked at the criteria. Traditionally, research experience has been valued over teaching or administrative experience, and women and ethnic minorities are more likely to be in the latter two categories. So we put them on a level pegging. We also introduced mentoring and coaching for people who were going through that process. And the result was an increased number of female and ethnic minority people being promoted. Sounds like magic, but actually there's a lot of kind of common sense and understanding of the process involved in that. And we're learning from that. I mean, there were small numbers for our ethnic minority staff getting into senior academic positions, but they were significant, and we will carry on pushing that. Of course, we offer a formal mentoring program to all of our staff. But I don't think we should forget the mentoring that both our staff and students are engaged with, young people in local communities, to help open higher education, but also into Warwick as well. You know, a kind of glimpse into what it's like. I think universities can sometimes seem like very closed institutions if you don't have that family history of knowing what university is about. And so our widening participation program and the outreach work that we do is incredibly important, and mentoring is a very kind of key part of that. I think Rachel mentioned we've also recently been engaged with a program with the EY Foundation, where we've been working with young people from local disadvantaged communities to give them an opportunity to meet with people at Warwick, to gain some work experience. And our staff have been mentoring these young people. And I know that that's a hugely valuable experience, not just for the young people, but also for our staff to understand the challenges that these young people face and how they can change our behaviours and our culture for a more inclusive place for our students and staff at Warwick itself. And I think those are the seeds of change that we really need to kind of nurture. And that brings me to the subject actually of reverse mentoring, because I think this is a hugely valuable way of creating cultural change. Mentoring is certainly not a one-way street, and you'll all know that if you've been involved. But traditionally, it's been seen as a senior person mentoring somebody more junior. But we're now looking and using at how reverse or reciprocal mentoring can be facilitated to help with cultural change. It's about helping people understand people who are different to them. It's another way of actually us educating ourselves about diversity and inclusion while we also help somebody in their career. I think closely linked to this is sponsorship, and I can't not mention this. Mentoring, we know, is hugely valuable in progressing people's careers. However, it's not always enough. I would say mentoring is talking about you. Sponsorship is talking about you to other people. And we recognize that all organizations have networks, and it's those networks that really help you get ahead by making the right connections and getting the right opportunities. And it's these very networks that are usually closed to women and people in minority groups. So at Warwick, we have just launched our Inspire program, which is working with underrepresented people at senior levels to progress their careers to the very top. And the program is about navigating the cultural barriers that Justin very eloquently spoke about. And sponsorship is a key part of this program. Our executive board are actually working very closely with all of our Inspire participants in a sponsorship role. So I think mentoring comes in many forms, and in our current strategies to bring about greater diversity and a more inclusive culture, it has a very central role. Thank you.
Great, thank you to all the speakers. Now, one of the great advantages of being chair is I always allow myself a couple of my own questions while you can all think of your questions and pop them in the chat. I see we've got a great one from Robert, which I'm saving up from Cool Bear after I've asked my own. So first, Justin, can I kick off by asking you, so you were talking about bringing together kind of 15 people around a table with two kind of, role models to teach them how to navigate through the workplace. So how did you do that? Because it sounds as if you had to kind of work that out for yourself. So how did you do that?
At times with great difficulty, right? So, I suppose I've gone through some of the challenges that that I've had. I suppose one thing that really stood out to me, we did a personality test within our team, like 30 odd people, and it's one of these where red means leadership, director, yellow means you're kind of full of life and you always want to be at the party. Green was caring, and blue was analytical. And when we plotted this, we plotted where the inner circle was the personality trait isn't that strong. The middle trait, well, the middle part of the circle was personalities were okay, and then the end part of the circles were extreme. And I was the only person that was extreme, and I was extreme red, by the way. Which is probably the worst one you want to be, but anyway. But the fact that I was extreme really kind of struck a chord with me, because it made me think that maybe to get through all of the microaggressions, the feeling of not belonging, you need to have an extraordinary amount of resilience and belief in yourself. And there's a study that came out a few years ago in the asset management industry, which said there were only 12 black fund managers in the asset management industry. And we did a roundtable with those 12 black fund managers, right? Out of thousands, this is. I remember looking around the table, and it's just after I did this personality test, and I was thinking, these are all extreme reds. Not all of them are. And maybe in order to succeed and to be the only one at your business, that this resilience, this kind of extreme personality is what you need to get through. So I think that's been a key reason. And yeah, I think that, but also the other one is having a great support network, and not just friends, family, that I can lean on at times of stress. You know, in particular, last year was particularly difficult with the whole George Floyd situation, and leaning on that support network to get me through that, and to help others as well, was something that I kind of remember. You know, it sticks out to me.
Great, thank you very much. And building on what you, Justin, also said earlier on, that lovely analogy of diversity, inclusion, belonging. Cool Bear, it made me wonder whether or not, because we've obviously got a social inclusion strategy, whether or not we actually needed to raise our ambition to belonging.
Belonging actually for me is a critical part of the inclusion piece. I mean, inclusion for me is made up of two key things. One is about being able to be yourself. So that's your own kind of identity, being kind of accepted for who you are, that belonging piece, but also to be included is actually to feel part of something. So that's that kind of balance between the kind of culture of an organization and welcoming people in, but welcoming them so that they can be themselves. So belonging, absolutely agree with Justin, is critical. And I think this is where, you know, we can get lost in just counting the numbers of things. We just count the number of different types of people. That on its own is just not enough, because to help people to actually flourish, they need to be able to be kind of at their best, to be creative, to be innovative. They need to feel comfortable that they are accepted for who they are, that they're not going to be discriminated against and treated differently because of that, but actually they're going to be valued for their expertise, for their experience and everything else that they bring.
Yeah, and it's linked, I think, to that notion of psychological safety as well, which we have discussed in some of the Benecondola webinars, which we put on for staff earlier this year. And that leads me to a very nice question, which actually was one of the questions which came in as a pre-question, which I'm going to put to you all. And it's about, it goes to that, how do we measure success in this area, and how also do we make everybody within our organizations accountable for it? Can I ask you, Elam, to kick us off on that?
Yes, certainly. In my mind, I think if we carry on doing what we've been doing, we're going to get the same results, aren't we? So in my mind, I think it's critical that we put diversity, inclusion, and other targets in the performance reviews of senior managers and board members. And that has to have an impact on their remuneration and on their progression. Otherwise, they're not going to be sufficiently induced to do something different. The other side of it is further measurements, not just in terms of boards, but also several layers down, and looking for root causes and analyzing which specific groups have challenges and root causes that are preventing them from progressing upwards in those organizations and big companies. For example, women returning after having a family, the support they get at home, the concept of having a sponsor at difficult times in their lives. Lots and lots of root causes and lots of solutions. So the good news is there's a lot we can do.
Right. Justin.
Yeah, I agree with that on objectives. One of the things that we've done at LGIM is ensure that not just in managers' objectives, actually in everybody's objectives, there is a D&I objective. So at the end of the year, when people get rated, that is they need to show examples of where they've been inclusive and so on and so forth. I think that's really important.
Can I just stop you there, though, because the thing I get the objectives and I get the performance and I get the incentives, which Ellen said. I'm always slightly worried, though, that can lead into kind of tokenism. So can you kind of, can you go further into what kind of objectives you think they should be?
Yeah, I think it's really examples of where managers and where people in the business have been inclusive, and you've got to kind of give examples throughout the year. I think that isn't necessarily tokenism. I think if it was, you have to hire X amount of people this year, then that could be, that could be tokenism. But I think this is more about inclusive and creating an inclusive culture, which I think we all have a role to do. Just on how we measure success, I think, clearly numbers and data is really important. For ethnic minorities, the data simply isn't there from lots of businesses. Lots of businesses are trying to they say they're trying to increase the data, but actually what you really need is real campaigns to get the data coverage up from to a high number. But I think probably more important than that there's actually qualitative data that you can look at, right? So you've got people in your business actually asking them how they feel about being in your business, and this isn't just minorities or women. It's actually, you can ask everybody, do you feel this is a good place to work, and actually what are the challenges you're going through? So I think listening exercises like that actually really help the business understand where their employees and where their people are at, and actually ultimately the people in the business will drive the culture. So understanding that, I think is really important.
Great, thank you. Colbert, final answer.
Yes, so two key things. I think there's the hard measures in terms of the numbers of people, but then there's also the measures in terms of how our systems and processes are working. How are we measuring that kind of experience of people through an organization? Do we look at what the rates of progression are, for example? Who gets to kind of have the opportunities? All of those things I think are just as important in terms than the kind of performance review type of objectives that we set. But I think Justin also touched on this, which is the softer measures around what does our inclusion actually mean? What is that kind of cultural experience with people? I think those are the things that we need to develop more as organizations. I think we've been very focused on the hard data because we're naturally kind of drawn to that. But I think we need to look at those softer pieces, as you mentioned, around, the safety kind of piece. How do you feel about your colleagues? All of those kind of soft measures that really tell us about what the cultures are. Because you can bring in diversity, and lots of organizations are getting better at recruiting diversity, but they're not very good at keeping it. And then you get the revolving door piece. And I think that's the bit that we're not really doing so well, that we need to kind of have more of a focus, is how do we measure that kind of cultural piece?
I think if I can just add that measurements and data are only one component of this. And I think equally powerful are the stories that go around in the organization, because no matter what the measurements and data says, and no matter what the end results are, if people are hearing stories that don't demonstrate a positive, inclusive culture, then they're not going to believe the numbers. For instance, if someone, a senior manager, let's say, is known to walk all over his or her team, destroy customers, colleagues, and junior people in his team and his projects in order to deliver on his numbers and get promoted, does he or she get promoted in that organization? Those stories tell powerful things about the culture of the organization and how people feel about staying in that organization and their chances of progression. So senior leaders, decision makers, operational leaders, they all need to be very careful about how inclusive their decision making is in the business.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very powerful and very, very true point. Well said. So Justin, we have in the chat, we've got a request for you to repeat your lovely dancing party analogy, followed by another question, which very much goes to your story about grace. Just try and see if I can get it up. So somebody who works in a school and is very keen to help students deal with unintended exclusions, such as the example of Grace and not having her hair plaited. Have you got any advice for her about how she could do that?
I'll start with the analogy because that question's a bit hard. So, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being invited to dance, and belonging is being able to dance in your own way. Just on the school, one of the things that I actually had I wrote a letter to it was Theresa May's government actually, talking. She had a race advisor, and we spoke to her, and we tried to speak to her about what we can do in the schools, because it's a huge challenge, right? Particularly for ethnic minorities in schools where the exclusions seem to be extraordinarily high, particularly for Black children. I think it's just a matter of education and training of teachers. My wife used to be a teacher, for example, and she said that they never had any kind of bias training, and I think that bias training has got its critics, but I do think that for teachers not to have that, dealing with so many children, and they must have their own prejudices, they must have their own biases, for them not to understand that, I think is really is a real challenge. But I think a lot of that is a lot of the way you address this is just by communication, by having discussions about what you think inclusion and exclusion is, and just trying to educate people. I think that's the way I would go about that. It's really interesting because the lady in my office who didn't do my daughter's hair, I haven't actually spoken to her about it. I will do, but I know it's going to make her feel so uncomfortable. So I actually haven't mentioned it to her. And because she's reasonably junior as well, and I'm senior, and it's just so I will do eventually, but I haven't done that. So I should really walk the walk if I'm going to give advice to other people.
Well, I think it would help her, because I'm sure she didn't do it with any intention of causing upset. But I think she would probably appreciate you having that conversation with her. So if you think of it as a kind of a gift, feedback as a gift. There's another question in the chat, just talking about schools, but more at that kind of that institutional level, from somebody who's a chairman of governors of a school where over 90% of the pupils are from a BAME background. So asking this probably for you, Colbert, what contacts do you have with schools, not only for the benefit of the university, but also to ensure that they are fully inclusive?
What contacts we have here at Warwick? Well, we're doing a huge amount of work with our kind of local schools through our widening participation program. So a lot of our widening participation team regularly kind of go into schools to talk to them about applying for university, kind of also kind of helping with lessons. So there's a number of things that kind of that we're doing. Also, our students are quite often involved in actually mentoring young people. I think we also already kind of mentioned the EY program, the EY Foundation program that we're involved with. I think that those programs are incredibly valuable. One of the other kind of major projects that we're involved with is Interuni, which is where we've got a local centre in Coventry, in a very kind of disadvantaged area. But actually what we're doing is we're running kind of like an after school club, actually. So kids kind of can come there, there will be teachers, they can kind of do their homework, and they'll have access to kind of mentors from school. So they really kind of get to be in a different space and have that engagement with people. And I think that's a hugely valuable piece of our work. I think one of the issues for us to kind of discuss at this stage actually is that a lot of this engagement work with schools has been very focused on those children who are kind of, I don't know, kind of they're 15, 16, 17. So they're getting ready or thinking about going to university. And I think one of the things that's become clear to us for a few years now is that actually children by about the age of 7 actually know they think they know what career possibilities there are for us, what the future is possible. And they've usually kind of decided about that kind of age, what is it that they're kind of aiming for? And we see the kind of gender divides in what young women think's possible to them as opposed to young men, but also in terms of the stereotypes that are imposed on young people, be it they from an ethnic minority background or from an economically disadvantaged background. So I think we need to see much more work being done with much younger children. And I think that's about the education system, not just the universities as well, if we're really going to turn that space around. And I think the impact of COVID is really shouting at us very loudly right now. And we're going to see that impact for many years to come, that actually we need a focus on much younger kids too.
No, I think that's true. So a question for Alem. One about, so what are some of the barriers or difficulties about which prevent students from diverse backgrounds accessing mentoring, and how or if technology can help?
So when I first started Migrant Leaders 3 years ago, I thought I will have to put a lot of my efforts into building their young people's confidence and raising their aspirations. And actually I was wrong. They actually have very high aspirations. They are very ambitious. They want to do well. They have lots of hopes and dreams. And what they're lacking is insights, experiences, and connections. And they are lacking employability and social capital, because at Migrant Leaders, we're working with now 600 young people. So we focus on that. We obviously, through the early mentoring from the age of 16, they get connected to a senior mentor in a big company that matches their aspirations and sector and jobs that they want to work in. We give them work experiences. We run a lot of seminars and workshops to build employability and social capital in them. We've got webinars on how to present yourself, how to dress, how to network, and I have been astonished by their talent. They pick up on the information and they learn faster than I ever did. They're amazing. So it's particularly a rewarding time at the moment at Migrant Leaders Charity, because we're beginning to see the results of the first cohort of young people who joined our charity 3 years ago. And I can only describe it as a mutational transformation in them. And they're landing brilliant jobs, and they are much better equipped than I was when I first started my graduate job. So their progression will hopefully be better, faster, and less painful than mine.
Right. So that's lovely to hear. So can I ask a question which actually kind of occurred to me when I was listening to you all earlier on? So we're kind of talking about new ways of working and potentially going into a much more hybrid working model. Do you think that is going to have an impact on inclusion in businesses and institutions? And if so, for good or for bad?
I think in some ways it will improve inclusion, because people's home situation, challenges, caring responsibilities are all very different. And if companies are more flexible and focus on outputs and outcomes rather than where people work, and trust their employees, and obviously build some performance measures and SLAs as well, and focus on outputs and outcomes, I think on balance, this might actually improve inclusion.
Thank you. Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the pandemic, it shined a light on people's childcare responsibilities, particularly the first lockdown where, schools closed and so on and so forth, and nurseries closed as well in that one. So we had, both of our children at home, and yeah, so I think that managers now are just more aware that people do have these responsibilities, and they're willing to give them flexibility to to deal with those responsibilities. I also think, you know, one of the things that one of the big challenges in fund management was these morning meetings that we do, and you have to be there in person. We no longer have to be there in person. You know, we do them all on Teams now. It means that people can get in later if they're going to get in. So actually, I do think that the flexibility that will be afforded to people in the new world will mean that you can attract a wider range of talent. Particularly, I think that relates to gender, where we know that despite there is more of a balance now between childcare responsibilities of men and women, women are still tend to do the majority of childcare responsibilities. So I'm looking forward to this new world, and actually think that we should be able to get a wider range of talent into our business.
Thank you. Colbert, what do you think?
I agree with our panel, really. I think there are many, many kind of benefits. And actually, one of the things that we've noticed here at Warwick have been some of the benefits to our students as well. I mean, I know there's been a lot of debate around, you know, online learning as opposed to person, but obviously we've been in the situation that we have. But one of the things that we've seen is that we've seen an improved experience and outcome for students who have disabilities, and for students from ethnic minorities. So there's kind of hints there around kind of culture, but also the kind of physical aspects perhaps that enable people to actually improve their performance. So I think there are many benefits, but I think there are also challenges. There are challenges in terms of managers learning to manage people in different ways and making sure that we don't exclude people online. So it's probably just as easy to network with people online and have meeting with people online as the usual suspects and actually leave out. So we could see greater isolation. So I'd say it's a great opportunity for us to do things differently, but with some caveats that actually there are places we could fall down that we need to kind of take note of and to work on. I mean, the other thing I think we need to think about is how we do still bring people together for those moments of creativity and innovation, which we also know is important. You know, and how do we kind of create a hybrid model where we still allow people that flexibility, because we know that's great for people, but also how can we still bring people safely together so that we still have those water cooler moments, as we call them.
I totally agree. So Colbert, another one from for you, which is in the Q&A. Comments about how some universities out there are focusing on decolonizing curriculums and also making language more accessible as two initiatives of closing the attainment gap between groups. Are there similar education-specific structural changes that Warwick is working on?
Yes, I think this is an incredibly important part of our strategy right now, and it's one that I'm really excited about, actually, because we've been actually working quite hard on what we're calling our inclusive education model, which is really taking a 360-degree look and actually what are all the different things that kind of actually affect that student experience. And ultimately the attainment gap. But I think we're also very kind of aware that the attainment gap isn't the only measure. We need to understand that kind of cultural experience of students in the classroom. You know, what does it feel like to be in the classroom? You know, what are the behaviors there, as well as the kind of more structural aspects, which is the curriculum content. And we've been doing a lot of work with our students. In fact, they led a whole piece of work around decolonizing the curriculum. So we're actually taking the learning from that and applying it to all inclusion aspects. So there's the kind of curriculum content, but it's also about teaching methodology. So we understand different learning needs of students as well. And actually, what is the kind of best delivery? And looking at how we're going to measure the progress of that as well. So we've just been working with all of our data analysts on creating dashboards so that we can look at the data quite instantly to see, you know, what's happening, where are we seeing the movements and where are we not. So we're actually going full on launch with this model in September, and we're working very closely with our staff and with our students, very central to this, and it's a piece that I'm really excited about about.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're probably getting into our kind of our last question or two. So Justin, something you said about, you know, the kind of the red, green, blue has led to a kind of a series of comments about diversity in its widest form, such as neurodiversity, and questions come in for both Justin and Ellen about somebody saying it'd be great to hear about how understanding neurodiversity in the workplace has evolved in your experiences.
It's a really good point, because look at me and Justin. We look different. We are different genders, but on neurological thinking, we're probably very similar, because I too am an extreme red, blue, so analytical, but really red in character. And what Justin said earlier made me think, you are right, Justin. There's a reason why I'm an extreme red, because I had to be to survive, given what I've gone through. To succeed, I had to be a red. And maybe there's some genetical predisposition there as well. But that's the thing. Diversity isn't about just what you can see, but also diversity of thought and the way we solve problems. And that's why inclusion is really important, because if we are truly inclusive, then that diversity of thinking will come to the table. And when companies, organizations, educational institutions have problems to solve, invariably we will come up with much better solutions, because each of us think differently. So that is really, really important for us to really be inclusive and bring people who think differently to us.
Completely agree. Justin.
Yeah, so on neurodiversity, I've got to put my hands up and say that I'm still learning. I run the networks for the employee networks at Elgin. I co-chair them, and there's 8 networks, and they cover gender, ethnicity, disability, and one is neurodiversity. It's a newly formed one, and I was actually surprised how many people are affected, either their children or them, by neurodiversity challenges. And so, yes, I've got to say I'm learning. You know, the way this can manifest itself, for example, is just the way people communicate. We spoke about, you know, this flexible hybrid working. For some people, you know, this isn't ideal. One lady who's on the neurodiversity committee, she told me that she doesn't like email communication because of her neurodiversity challenges that she's having, and it has to be on by phone, so or face to face. So I do think that, as I say, I'm still learning. I do think it's really important because, you know, there are skills that people who are neurodiverse can have, which can be, you know, accretive to a business overall. So yeah, still learning, but I'm getting there.
Right, well, that's a fantastic note on which to end, because I think everybody on this webinar, I hope, has learned a lot today, or at the very least one kind of takeaway point. Thank you, panelists, for helping us with that. I'm sure everybody will have learned from you and your sharing of your experience and your passion and your expertise. So thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who is on the call, because the very fact you're on it means that you're here to learn. Thank you also for your fabulous questions. I didn't get through all of them, but I hope I got through a sufficient amount of them. Great beginning to the weekend. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, alumni. Thank you, team, for having arranged it for us, and wishing everybody all the best.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank
Bye.
you.